जब मैं मरूंगा, am I going to be one more like rich Indian immigrant in the US with a house in the Hamptons, or am I going to be known for something else?
Hi, my name is Pranav Kothari. I work in the Mindspark division of educational initiatives and take some of our personalized adaptive learning software to children who need it the most. I'm so excited to have Akshay, my classmate from Harvard Business School, on this talk today. Akshay went to an IIT Bombay, went to Boston Consulting, and then went to HBS, a very similar trajectory to what I did. So I'm very curious to learn, as to why he made some of the same choices that I did. Akshay started a company called Avanti Fellows, is a co-founder of that, and also runs a non-profit to serve the children who need it the most. I'm also going to pick Akshay's brains on, who will solve this problem and what the future might look like. So glad to have you, Akshay.
Right.
Thanks so much for coming. So Akshay, IIT Bombay, Boston Consulting Group, Harvard Business School. Abhi kya kar raha hai tu?
Good question. So, as you know, of course, we work on maths and science education. So, I think in some ways I do the most cliched thing a former IIT student does, which is I teach kids for the IIT exam. I think though the thing that we do, which is exciting even to me, is we do it in a very different sort of way, wherein we use blended learning, flipped classrooms, a bunch of tech in the classroom to allow fairly novice teachers to do an excellent job. And I think in many ways, even in the arch of the journey with Avanti, as you know, we started as a non-profit. And at that time, the ambition was to be the big brother, big sister of India, very large volunteer collective. And I think that journey over the last 8 years has, led us to some conclusions, right? And the most important out of them being that unless we fix what happens in classrooms, nothing is really going to fundamentally change. So Avanti, now we teach about, all in all between both entities, about 50,000 children who are in our programs, of which about 8,500, 9,000 are in direct programming in the company, and about 1,500 are in the direct programs in the non-profit, and the rest are through teacher training work. And we start from class 8 and start introducing our product in the class and train teachers to use it. And of course, then automate assessments and a bunch of other things to try and produce good outcomes on these very, straightforward goals, which is getting these kids through the JEE, the NEET, getting them into good colleges. Right. So that's what we do.
So Akshay, with a degree from IIT Bombay, working at Boston Consulting Group, and starting at Harvard Business School, you could have done anything. You could have been with, what our friends do at a hedge fund, venture capital, private equity, investment banking. Why did you leave all of that and start a non-profit to help children learn?
It's a good question. Sometimes I ask myself that question. But I think, and I think I remember this image in my mind very, distinctly. So I had taken a leave of absence from HBS to work at HeartFlow. So the company had built the most accurate test for heart disease in the world. Sort of a stereotypical, Silicon Valley story, from 2 people to 200 people, gobs of money, own building in Redwood City. And every day in the morning, I would leave my apartment on near Dolores Park on San Francisco, sit in my Mini Cooper and drive to Redwood City. And I think, and every night I would be on the phone or on Skype with Krishna, with my co-founder, talking about Avanti's work. And I think after 2 or 3 years, and I think there was this day when I was kind of driving on the 101, and I was like, and I think the sheer relative pointlessness of what I was doing sort of hit me, right? I was like, what exactly am I doing? Right? I'm going to get up every morning, go do this. The company is excellent. It's going to make a lot of money. I'll get rich, and then what? I will sit in another car and then drive to another office and then do the same thing and rinse and repeat, which to me was not the most exciting thing I could do. And I think if you like teaching and if you like working with kids, I think it's a little bit like a drug, right? So over time, I think just the draw of, I think one, being in India, Two, being in India and being sort of connected to India, which your work and my work allows us to do, I think was too much of an attraction to do the other thing.
Yeah, attraction to hoga yaar, but like you're sitting in a nice Mini Cooper, it's like nice AC. वो सब छोड़ के दिल्ली में, ऑटो में, बस्ती में जाके पढ़ाना, I mean, it's not like really like, tempting hai, but there's also the harsh reality of life. So how do you deal with both?
No, I very honestly, I still deal with it, right? I don't think it was ever, I don't think it's, if you asked me very honestly, was it the absolute right decision? I don't think I can ever say 100% yes, right? I think, am I happy with my choice? Absolutely. Was there trade-offs? Absolutely, right? And I think, to your point, when I stopped doing it part-time and started doing it full-time, I think the first few years that adjustment was quite hard, right? Because I think the low-income setting or the heat or the lack of that stuff was okay, like you could cope with that. But I think the stuff that was harder was the dramatic change in work environment also, which is who you were working with, the general level of training of the team members, the day-to-day interactions with the bureaucrats and people in the government. I remember we had a center in Shahadra, and about 6 months in, I get a phone call from some guy कि हम माता का चंदा लेने आपके पास आए थे, आपने चंदा नहीं दिया, हम खून की नदियाँ बहा देंगे. This kind of nonsense. So that stuff was really hard to deal with. Right? Just to realize that not only, I mean, the sort of the sexy thing was I'm going to this whole Swadesh story. I'm going to come back home. I'm going to work with my people, and that stuff is attractive to many of us, right? I think the part that people don't tell you is that comes with a dramatic change in workplace setting, which I had honestly never worked in such an environment, right? So I think that was actually really hard to get used to. To the question of why, it really is that. I think at one level I was bored, right? So I think my life was kind of laid out like an algorithm in front of me, and I'm sure it was for you, right? You knew exactly what was going to happen, right? Like you had come from BCG to HBS, I had come from BCG to HBS, right? We would have, worst case scenario, gone back and become management consultants, best case scenario, become hedge fund managers. We would have been at the first fund, at some point we would have done well, we would have bought a house in the Hamptons. That stuff was just too linear, too algorithmic, and I really would, and part of in some ways the competitor in me, like the type A person in me, the whole axis of competition got flipped, right? I was like, ye to har koi kar lega. Right? Like everyone in like all of us in that class would have done that, right? That was nothing really, maine kya kaun sa tir maar liya. So I think part of it was just that, which is the question of relevance of, jab main marunga, am I going to be one more like rich Indian immigrant in the US with a house in the Hamptons, or, am I going to be known for something else? So I think that is fundamentally what drew me to the work. And I think that question of relevance and of daily sort of, small micro achievement is what keeps me in it. Though there are, of course, challenges and complications of doing this work.
So, our other classmates are solving very important and interesting problems in their corporate careers, in the financial services space.
Yeah.
Are you really solving an interesting and important problem?
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, we would not do this, right? So, and I think that, the nature of this problem is very fascinating to me, right? Because I think in some ways, education specifically, I think health is similar, but education more so, is we are solving a policy problem through business, right? Which is very, very unique to education, which is, I think, the success of our businesses is going to solve a major policy issue for the government. And I think that's the only way. I think there's very little you can do in terms of, there's some, you can change the assessments and so on and so forth. But very little fundamentally the government can do from a policy perspective other than spending more money on the problem, because right now I feel that there's not even solutions that money could chase.
Right.
So in terms of sort of a sector forming, like, we're almost in some ways in India at the stage where we could be the Rockefellers of the education space, right? Where we might fundamentally create a new structure, create new industry segments, create a fundamentally different way to do education at scale, which is unique to India. I don't think this is even an opportunity that exists in many other parts of the world. So I think from the uniqueness and the interestingness of the problem, I would even do this as a PhD student, right? Let alone as a company, with the layer of trying to make money while doing it, which I think is really cool. Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting problem. At the same time, I think in some settings I do miss the, how would you say, I do miss the analytical elegance of the problems I worked on before, right? Which is where if I was running, say, largely an internet company, or let's say even at Heartflow, where there was a diagnostic test that we were trying to get to insurance players, the hard things I dealt with is what is the health economic model, what is the, what should we price this at, and so on and so forth, which were very analytical problems, which were very comfortable to solve for me, right? Now I think the problems, so I miss that, because now I feel like 80% of the problems I solve are these human behavioral problems, which often the thing I'm good at, which is analytical thinking, is often not the right way to even solve them.
Right.
So that is the part I do miss, which is, I do miss, being able to make an Excel and solve a problem, which doesn't really happen in our work.
So, you've chosen to, improve the education sector, clearly, but for low-income students. And you've chosen to do this in a for-profit setting, right? And you've chosen to be an entrepreneur in a country where people are saying, "Tumne chanda nahi diya to, kaun bhayega." I mean, why pick such an uphill battle? Like, why pick a combination of all four rather than just taking one at a time?
So I think the short answer is we chose to do the company because we were convinced that's the only way the problem gets solved. So I think and this is, I think, in some cases a counterproductive thing, because I remember the first few times I went and met venture capitalists, they asked me, why do you do this? And I gave them all the answers, and I want to make a lot of money was never part of them. Right. And over time, I think I have learned that is not the right strategy in those conversations, because but I think truly for us, I think the reason we started the company was we came to the very clear conclusion that in the absence of us being able to do this in a commercially viable way, and some people making a lot of money of doing this, this problem would not get solved. So that's why we started the company. We initially did start doing this as a non-profit. We were reasonably successful in raising money, given our backgrounds, right? And I think but I think we were very convinced that this is not really going to work unless, we can employ multiple VPs of X, Y, and Z who are paid corporate salaries, not the IIT Harvard corporate salaries, but at least, the legit, 40, 45 lakh, 50 lakh salary, right? And there were technology people, there were curriculum people, there were people of high caliber working on it, as is the case in EI, right? Unless that ecosystem was created and sustained, and there was the potential at some point for there to be a large infusion of capital to chase market capture. I think these two things, right? Can we create and sustain a quality team at the top? And can we eventually attract enough capital that we could blitz the market? This problem would not get solved.
But other NGOs have solved it, right? There are now at least 300 crore NGOs like the Prathams, Educate Girls, Cavaliers of the world. Yeah. I mean, they have managed to do this. So why couldn't you have done it?
I think I think the problem they solve for is slightly different, right? So in the case of it's taken them a lot of time, right? So I think the way I view our work is we are solving in some ways we have to deal with all the shit that the education system produces because we work in high school. So when we start working, and we work on college access to elite colleges, what we really try and do is we're trying to take children who are the victims of a fairly faulty education system, right? So they're the children who are in class 9 at a grade 6 level, grade 7 level, but the aspiration for everyone in our segment is कि हम NIT जाएंगे, हम IIT जाएंगे, हम doctor बनेंगे, हम architect बनेंगे. So when you're trying to solve for that funnel, the amount of capital needed on product development is of a different order. We are going to have to compete head-on with the FITZIs and the Akashes of the world, right? Because if you want to say here is paradigm A that I believe is better, it has to displace the entrenched paradigm. If you contrasted that with what Pratham does, right? In the case of Pratham, they work very specifically for school dropouts. That's the bulk of their work. Where in any case, there's no business possible. So because I think we deal with a complex problem, I think also because we deal with a problem that has massive economic potential, right? We could be having, if things go well, in 15 years, we could be having a conversation where we are, on top, parts of like 1,000 crore companies, right? So there is that potential. So why not? I think that was also the part of it. Like, why would you not? If you could build 1,000 crore, that's a 100 crore non-profit. That is, the 100 crore non-profit is an example of the most successful fundraising entity on the planet. And most of those 100 crore non-profits don't run a single program. They run multiple products effectively that are contributing to the 100 crore. So if we had the potential to build a 1,000 crore dissemination entity doing largely 1 or 2 products, why not go after that first?
But what are the challenges you've faced, as being a for-profit? Like, does that sort of stop access to donor money because you're a company? There's no free lunch, right? So I heard the story on the for-profit side, but does it come with any strings attached?
I think it does, and I think we didn't fully understand it clearly at the beginning. In both ways. I think the donor money for us has always been something that's relatively more easily accessible, because in some ways, Avanti, in the non-profit world, in this college access space, there's not very many people who do our job. So, and given the whole hoopla around Super 30, all this stuff, the corporate money, the sort of CSR money has always been accessible. So saying no to that, actively saying, here, I'm dying, middle of the night, fighting, so on and so forth, to, book 1 crore of revenue in some center, whereas someone could just give me a 2 crore grant. I think we struggled with this trade-off initially, where, we ended up doing some of those things which hurt us building a good business. I think over time, we started realizing that to tactically say no to this in the short term was a better strategy in the long term. So there are challenges with it. And I think the other thing which, we don't talk about enough is that we actively pivoted our model away from a BOP focused model, which again, I think hearing your perspective on EI would make sense. I think we in effect came to the same conclusion, which is that the business is going to be driven by the gold standard consumer, right? If a DPS is not using your product, if a top end school is not using your product, and if the child is not willing to pay top dollar for your product, in our segment, our product has no value. So, and also all of the margins get generated initially there. So, we spent a couple of years trying to have a purely low income focused model, and it didn't work. And then we pivoted away from that to say, look, we will have a equal opportunity model. We will go after profit with the faith in ourselves that, look, eventually the intent of doing all of this was to work with the low income kids. So we will continue to do that. And in fact, since we made that pivot, we've been able to work with more government school children than we could before, because the business is viable. We're able to raise more investor capital. When we raise a large amount of investor capital, our ability to devote some time and resources to, working with the BOP increases, and our speed of growth increases, right? So, those two pivots have been important, which is moving slightly up market, focusing on that, and also maintaining a clear focus that we want to earn the bulk of our dollar, as opposed to, take it in grants.
But are you losing focus? I mean, you started out doing, getting into the IITs for the poorest children. Now you're saying, jo paisa deta hai, usse main le lunga.
Yeah, so I think it was more than a dilution of focus, it was a shift in focus. So to say I don't know, don't really want to work entirely on this tiny problem of saying I want to get this small number of, and I think there's about 20,000 of these children in the country, low income, high potential children into the IITs, right? I instead want to create a fundamentally new paradigm to run science and math classrooms. And I think once we cast it that way and we view it that way, I think the pathway becomes fairly clear. I think, and similar, and I'd be keen to hear what from the EI's perspective also, right? Which is that if you're going to say, this is going to be the new gold standard for running science and math classrooms, or the new gold standard for a teacher in science and math in a typical school, there is no way you achieve that without the top end of the market buying into that, right? So, in my mind, the day, if you look at just the history of, even if you took the narrow focus of test prep, even now when the government wants consultants, or wants knowledge on how to do test prep, they will largely still look to the Akashes and Kota and FIITJEE of the world, right? If they want to understand how to do assessments, they will talk to EI. They are very unlikely. Even if the non-profit is doing a really good job, it's still going to be said, okay, this might be a subpar solution for the poor, right? And we wanted very clearly to not go down that path. Right. And also simultaneously, this shift in focus also meant that the business was more viable. Right. One of the things that I have, I think, so I think one of the things that I've realized over time is also the way capital works. In this space is very similar to how it works in any other space, right? There are funds that have mandates, right? There is a thesis they have sold, and it makes sense, right? So the large foundations, their thesis is, let's say, creating game-changing shifts. But as in my conversations with many of them, with Adele or with everyone else, I think they've also started to realize that they have a lot of money, but they don't really have enough money to create an industry segment. Which means that whatever company they invest in has to still get to the point where it can attract that exceptionally large chunk of capital at some stage.
Right.
And then everybody downstream from them is anyway going to chase returns, right? So trying to set yourself up to not be a high return company or be deeply diluted is not smart. And I think the focus is on building a viable company that ushers in a new paradigm in science and math teaching in classrooms, right? The poor word is out of that, which is why I think, and we're aware of this fact, right? I think this is something we're acutely aware of because, I mean, of course, that's a struggle we deal with. Which is why I think about a year or so ago, we kind of reactivated the non-profit. It was already running in the Navodaya programs that it was doing, but I think we clearly, I think, bit the bullet and acknowledged the fact that the company is going to have social impact, but is not going to have the extent of social impact we wanted unless there's another entity that magnifies / catalyzes this, what we are learning in the government sector. And there have to be people other than me and Krishna who can deal with the IAS officers and work on that front. And because the non-profit was already around, was credible, it was there for 8 years, we kind of stepped off the board of the non-profit, created a new governance structure, brought in good board members, got in a strong team. In fact, some people from the company moved to the non-profit. To try and say, look, we'll just create an independent entity that becomes an expert in working with government systems to do this. Yes, the products of the for-profit will support it, but in some ways the custodian of that original mission has become in large part that non-profit board. In fact, have the existing team be at a point where they can run the non-profit on their own. Because I think there is, what has been really interesting is that the moment we empowered the non-profit more, I think more critical and more nuanced questions were starting to be asked about the relevance of our for-profit product in that setting, which I think is a good sign, right? Which is to say that I think it places a certain amount of pressure on the company as well, that if we want the non-profit to use our products, it's, they need to be more relevant to that segment than, a variety of competitors. And I think there will be competitors, right? I think increasingly the scale in Indian education is going to be with, the government school student eventually, right? The big scale,
right?
Or that element, or the low cost affordable private school student. So eventually, if it's not us, it will be Baiju, it will be somebody else who will go after that segment. So in some ways, the non-profit is going to apply that push on us to make sure that, our core strength, which is knowing that segment better than everyone else, is maintained to some extent.
When you say the non-profit is going to demand relevance of the product from the higher income, what does that mean? Is that a language issue? Is it a translation, a contextualization? Like, can you give examples of?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is that, when we work in the, because our roots were test prep for Navodaya kids who are pretty, I've come to realize that the JNVs actually have more grade level children than the best private schools in the country, right? Because they're really good. One of the immediate things we started seeing was that our product was designed at a grade level and above level, right? So, if we were at grade 9 level in class 9, our product worked well. Right. In the government school setting, the moment you step out of the Navodayas, there's only 10% children who are at that achievement level in class 9. Correct. So that was the first push, right? Which is that, hey, this just doesn't really work. In fact, last year when we ran it in Haryana, in the English medium schools, that was the most, cutting feedback, which is that we need to make it more relevant for children who are at a lower grade level or lower understanding level. The second is, I think the implementation model in the government is quite different from what it was in, it is in our own centers, right? So resources are less, electricity doesn't really arrive. The teacher, an experienced teacher is, who's set in a certain way, has a multi-grade classroom, is running the product. So even small things like, is everything working offline? The teacher doesn't really want to have another teacher's video being run in class all the time. So they would like us to have different kinds of video content. So the feedback for that setting is quite different, and I think as we scale even in the company, that product we are building in effect for the non-profit right now will become quite relevant to the next tier of business that we would unlock.
But the cost of building the relevance of the product, right, as you've described it, where would the money for that come from?
So that is the only thing we charge the non-profit, right? So the non-profit pays us a small. So if we were to charge, say, 25,000 rupees for a product play in the company, to a private student, we'll charge 250 rupees to the non-profit. So it's still much lower, like 1/100th of the price. But there's still so much scale in that system that the odd like 50 lakh, 60 lakh, 1 crore a year, we are able to get in licensing revenue, and we use all of that to have a separate team that sits and focuses on them, just like we would focus on a 60 lakh, 70 lakh client, right? So we give them the same attention as we would to a school system that we were working with.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me, because even at EI, that's how we have set up. There's the Mindspark that goes to the private school kids, and then there's a contextualized version in Hindi and Gujarati that serves the government school kids. But I'm like so interested, because I remember like 10 years ago, I was sitting in class and we had the Arvind Eye Hospital case, right? I'm sure you had it as well. And the whole point was on cross-subsidization, right? Or price discrimination, which is like people who could pay paid for the eye surgery, but Arvind still gave away 60% of surgeries for free.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's so amazing that a case study we had in our first year entrepreneurial management course is something that we're both doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't actually think we're exaggerating, right? I think being pioneering in this space at this time, when India has just solved the access problem, and we're now trying to solve the quality problem, and being at least in the room when this is happening, I think is really rare. It's a very, very rare opportunity, right? The good thing about being for-profit is that there's a good chance we'll also make a lot of money off it. There's a chance that might happen. But even if that doesn't happen, right? Let's say even that doesn't happen, it's still a pretty exciting thing to have been part of, right? Right. I don't know how you think about this, right? I think the comfort though, and I think this is part of the reason why I always am a little humbled by our own backgrounds, right? Which is that I think the part that allows me to sort of enjoy this without stress is the realization that, look, let's say this goes really badly. We are still going to be really wealthy, right? I mean, I like not denying that fact, right? The fact that, look, let's say this all goes to shit, right? For whatever reason, or it doesn't work. Even if we someday have a change of heart and say, we would like to do something which was more traditional, or, make a lot more money, I don't think that option ever closes, right? So the way I really view it is, in some ways, I think the prime of our careers has shifted, right? I think the prime of our careers genuinely, I believe, is going to be when we are in our mid-40s. Like that's by then we would have figured out life and hopefully be in a position where, at least for me, I feel like, we can do something really powerful. And I think even purely analytically, the way I view it is, look, I had these 10 years, right? Before I had children and, all of that stuff, to really work on something which was intellectually deeply stimulating, which was, I could really be amongst the people who was the forefront of solving a certain problem. And I can't think of a better setting than this, right? And even if we feel that we're unable to solve it or we lose interest, and that's okay, right? There's still another 30 years of career left. Right. I feel very confident I'm smart enough to figure something else out to do. So I feel like I can genuinely enjoy the sort of thing on a meta level a little bit. Is it the same for you?
No, I think, I firmly believe that people who have, that safety net, that luxury, and most people do because, they've gone to a good college, they have the smarts to be able to do something else, that it is a duty for them to at least give this a shot. Yeah. Right? I mean, the risk is not that, it's not that risky because you can at some point always go back. I think this panned out when I was just graduating from HBS, right? I mean, I had the offers to go back to BCG, go back to the private equity firm. They would have paid for all of the college fees, and I would have gone back to higher salaries, in New York. Yeah. But I chose to do this, and a lot of my friends said, "Why don't you just go finish 2 years with them, and then you can always do this after that." And I thought to myself, let me do this first. Yeah. If this doesn't pan out, I can always go back to that. So I think the people who have been bestowed with an insurance that today, even if both of us go out and apply for jobs, we will get something, are the people who should take the biggest risks and do something. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Right? And I think more than we owe it to society, to hell with that, right? We owe it to ourselves. Like, I think for me, if you think of FOMO, right? The kind of self-doubt I would have suffered from if I had continued down a path and never done this, despite having started the non-profit, being there, let's say, I didn't do it, Krishna did it, somebody else did it, something else happened. 50 years from now, hey, I had a chance to be on the, on the ground floor for something and I didn't make that happen. I think the regret of not doing that in this space would have been far more than the regret of not having done that at the next, big consumer internet startup, right? For me, that's an opportunity that's always available. If you really wanted to start up in the basement and do a purely commercial company, sure, I don't really need to go work anywhere. We can do that anyway, right? And it might be trivializing the other problem, but I think it's worth doing that. I think it's worth acknowledging the fact that those problems are largely solvable by smart people with good tech, which in the circles we were in were largely commoditized attributes. And then there's a matter of luck and effort and so on and so forth, right? Solving this problem, I think it's a little bit of a privilege to even have access to the ability to solve this problem so early, right? Even when we were in business school, just 2000, 2009, and the EI existed, but Mindspark didn't exist. Avanti didn't exist. Half of our funders didn't exist, right? So this ecosystem didn't really exist. The notion of a social enterprise was kind of being formed. I don't think there's much distinction between a social enterprise and a company, but I think the notion of companies having social good, like we were starting to read the case studies on Arvind Netralaya and so on and so forth.
I mean, our first case study was on a for-profit social enterprise, a FUPSI.
Exactly. Right? And and I think to go from there to being in a position where we are in the formative stages of that in India and being part of that, I think is something I would have hated to have missed out on. I think I obviously as an entrepreneur always am extremely optimistic, so I believe we'll solve it. But even if we don't, what the heck, man? This was a pretty fun ride to have.
Thanks so much, Akshay, for coming. It was a great chat, and I really learned a lot about the intricacies of working in a for-profit company. Like your very clear articulation of the path you've chosen. And it's so great to have a co-classmate, someone who has had the same background, to feel like, boss, ekdam, upar ka lose nahi ho gaya.
Correct. There's at least one more mad person.
There's at least one more person. मैं कर रहा, देखो अक्षय भी तो कर रहा है, इसलिए मैं कर रहा हूँ. Cool. Thanks a lot, Akshay.